Hey everyone, I'm going to take you through my Archmage, Stormweaver, Spark Sorceress class build. Starting off with the skill tree, I have Archmage, Cast on Shock, with Lightning Conduit, Orb of Storm, Spark, Connectivity, Blink, Flame Wall, Soul Offering, and Skeletal Cleric. With Archmage, you want to run Lightning Mastery for support gems only if you do not hit level 21 with Archmage. There is a breakpoint associated with level 21 where you gain an additional 1% of damage as extra lightning. So if you don't hit level 21, say for example you only have level 20 or 19, you'll only get about 8% of damage as extra lightning. So in order to hit level 21, you either want to corrupt the support gem, the Archmage skilled spirit gem to hit level 21 with the +1 from corruption, or you can use Lightning Mastery and get it to hit 21. So the breakpoint associated with Archmage is 21, and the next breakpoint where you would get 10% of damage as extra lightning is 26. However, getting 26 is a bit difficult if you're not running, say, for example, the Prism of Belief Diamond with 3+ Archmage skills, but it's not worth it since you're basically giving up a Prism of Belief Diamond slot for Archmage instead of Spark. So unless you really want to have that next breakpoint of Archmage, I would just use level 21 breakpoint. And then going on next to Cast on Shock with Lightning Conduit. Very broken skill right now with the scaling of 100% more damage with hits per 5% shock effect on enemy. The keyword here being more damage, which is multiplicative. So 5% shock effect on enemy. What does this mean? So base shock is 20% by default. So this already does 400% more damage with base shock effect. So if you stack magnitude of shock, a lot of it, right? So every 20% magnitude of shock gives you 4% additional shock effect. Right now, my total shock effect is 90% shock effect on enemy, which translates to 1800% more damage with Lightning Conduit. So this skill just deletes boss due to the fact that the scaling on more damage is broken right now. And you want to run this with Energy Retention, Impetus, Elemental Focus, and Rising Tempest. So before recent patches, there were certain support gems that would work on Lightning Conduit and Cast on Shock. However, with the recent patches, that's no longer the case. And the example of those support gems that no longer work with Lightning Conduit are Considered Casting, Concentrated Effect, and Unleash. And how do you know they don't work with Lightning Conduit and Cast on Shock? Well, if you go here, right, you click on it, you click on, say, Cast on Shock, and then you go to the damage bar here, 72,000 damage right now with the current support gems that I'm running. I'm going to take off Rising Tempest, go back to it. Oh, actually, it's still 72,000, but let me use a spell first. There we go. So I just used Spark, so that gives me 12% more damage. It went up to 80k for a second there. See? 80k. And then I'm going to use Flame Wall. It goes up to 89k, right? So, but by default, if I don't use any spell, it doesn't get any more elemental damage from this support gem. So default is 72k. I take it off, and then I put in, for example, Considered Casting. See? So this used to work with Considered Casting. However, that is no longer the case. So Considered Casting doesn't even increase the damage anymore. So unfortunately, was one of the best support gem to use with Cast on Shock, but with the recent patch, that's no longer the case. Concentrated effect doesn't work either. Back then, this would increase the amount of damage here, but as you can tell, it's still 72,000 even though I slotted it in. So this doesn't work either, and Unleash doesn't work with Lightning Conduit and Cast on Shock, even though you can slot it in, it doesn't work. So I would just use Rising Tempest, Elemental Focus, Impetus, and Energy Retention. And then going on next to Orb of Storm, just run Conduction, Strip Away, Overcharge, Overabundance, and Lightning Exposure. So you can mess around and experiment by, say, for example, putting Lightning Exposure and Overcharge on Spark. However, I am running a Pinnacle Boss setup right now, so I would use, I would have this setup on Orb of Storm because it's the most efficient. You lay down 2 orbs before the boss spawns or end his invincibility phase, and then this would essentially give you a higher percent chance of shock with higher magnitude of shock. And then going on to Spark, I run it with Arcane Tempo, Acceleration, Inspiration, Control Destruction, and Considered Casting. For mapping purposes, I would use Shock Siphon instead of Considered Casting for the purpose of sustaining your energy shield, since I am an energy shield build. But for Pinnacle Bossing, I would use Considered Casting just for a bit more damage. Going on next to Conductivity, I run it with Heightened Curse, Cursed Ground, Magnified Effect, and Hex Bloom. Next, I have Blink, and with Ingenuity, which gives me 30% increased cooldown recovery rate. For Blink, I just have this as a quality of life thing, only run it on my secondary weapon setup. So if you open this up, you can click here in this box just to have it working on your secondary weapon set, so you don't waste that 60 spirit from having it on your main weapon set. Next, I have Flame Wall. Flame Wall is only here for the purpose of activating the 12% additional, 12% more elemental damage from Rising Tempest for your Lightning Conduit. The other effect is that it adds fire damage to your Spark, which is a nice additional boost to DPS, but otherwise I would just run it with Fortress, Spell Cascade, and Fire Mastery. And the last 2 skills are Soul Offering, Skeletal Cleric. I run Soul Offering with Dance Macabre, Oblation, Persistence, and Minion Mastery. And Skeletal Cleric, I run it with Last Gasp, not necessary, but I just have it there either way. Soul Offering is basically a second Sigil of Power due to the fact that it gives you 40% more spell damage. And then with Dance Macabre and Oblation, you get additional 60% more damage. So this skill with these 2 support gems gives you 100% more spell damage, which is again multiplicative due to the word more. So you want to use Sigil of Power, charge it up to max stage, which is stage 4, and then switch and use Soul Offering, which gives you more damage all the way up to, in my case, 1.25 mil, right? So that being said, moving on to passive skill tree. This skill tree is not usually what I run for mapping and bossing. This is an experimental skill tree which I use to one-shot max tier Arbiter, tier 4 Arbiter. I would use the other skill tree that I have in my other video. It's more balanced. It has a lot more energy shield, right? I only use this as an experiment to one-shot T4 Arbiter, so I wouldn't recommend this. However, if you do want to run this, I would just remove all the energy shield node and pump them into magnitude of shock nodes, like for example, alternating current, and going down here, extending it all the way down to frazzled to get an additional 125% more magnitude of shock. And then pump into raw power just for a little bit of more damage. And this last step is not necessary, but I switch out my sapphires for 3 more emerald jewels, which gives me more pierce, additional chance to chain from terrain, projectile speed, and a chance to shock. Like I said, not necessary, but if you want to try out this tree here to one-shot Arbiter, feel free to do so. However, like I said, I wouldn't recommend using this tree setup to do mapping, just because it leaves you very squishy. But this tree is very good for one-shotting Arbiter if you have the gear for it. So if you have the gear for this, I would recommend running this pure damage tree just to one-shot Arbiter and make the run a little bit faster for yourself. And then for gear, typical gear, spell damage, lightning damage on wand, cast speed, intelligence. This wand is very expensive. You don't need to have an expensive wand. Just try to get as close as you can to these stats here. I am running a non-crit build. I believe non-crit build is just better than crit build, just due to the fact that crit build you have to invest so many points, and you have to get crit on your wand and focus to make crit worth it. Otherwise, the RNG is just too highly variable to pump out consistent damage. So I run non-crit build with lightning rod. Just infinitely better in my opinion. So this is my helmet with 30 spirit. It gives me enough spirit to hit lightning conduit with the against the darkness time loss jewel or whatever. My focus, boots, belt, gloves, ring, armor, of course, dream fragments. And then if you want to run if you want to run rarity setup, energy shield is a lot more flexible without decreasing your survivability too much. This is why I run energy shield, because if I put this on, well, actually I'm not going to do it here because I need to refund my skill tree. It's going to make the video too long. But yeah, I might make a separate video for rarity, but in the meantime, that's my setup. Hopefully it helps you guys. And that being said, take care.